When you're editing your manuscript, there's layers to this. But who am I? I am Jane Nicole, the author of over 50 titles now. I'm a contemporary romance writer, and I'm currently working on a book to be traditionally published. Fingers crossed. But today, I want to tell you about revising your manuscript and the tools I use to help me succeed. So, you've written your manuscript, it's all done. The pages are written, the words are on the page, and there's tons and tons and tons of things for you to do now. First step is editing it. And what do? I talked about it in my last video about how I edit my manuscript. In this video, I want to talk about specifically the tools that I use. And there's three, and a little bonus. So the first tool I use, which I talked about in more detail in my last video, is Microsoft Read Aloud. So after I've read through my manuscript, I write everything in Microsoft, so this is kind of easy. But I click on the little button to read the text to me because oftentimes when I am reading, I will skim over words that may sound correct. What are those called? Homonyms. And I may read the flow of the sentence, long, extremely long run-on sentences, and think, oh yeah, that's fine. But when it's read out to me, I'm able to catch things that don't sound quite right. So Microsoft Read Aloud is my first tool. So if you are not reading Microsoft, I suggest even yourself reading the story out loud because your voice may pick up on things. It'll also cause you to slow down when you're listening to it as opposed to when you're reading it and you may be skimming along lines a little quicker, especially since you wrote them. You kind of know how the story goes and what you meant to say. Now it's time to listen to what is actually being said. So allow that story to be read out loud to you so that you can grasp it from another angle. Another thing this helps you to do is understand what the story is going to be about and how it's going to be read if you ever decide to get this book turned into audio. I will say that before I started making audio, this was never a concern for me. I never really worried about what the story would sound like as much as what it reads like. And there is a distinct difference. There's a difference in a run-on sentence when you read it and a run-on sentence when someone has to read it out loud. I dare you to go read a run-on sentence and see how quickly you run out of breath, literally, and how challenging it would be for a narrator to read that sentence if they had to. So challenge yourself to read over those run-on sentences out loud and figure out how you can break that sentence structure down. That's your first step. Once you've read through it out loud, now I use a tool called Hemingway. And I believe the subscription for this tool is only under $50. I can't exactly remember how much, but I'll drop the price in the comments of this video, in the video description, so you'll know exactly how much it costs. But Hemingway is a tool that I basically copy and paste each of my chapters that I'm reading and working through into Hemingway, and it will point out different things such as the overuse of adverbs, the overuse of um, different formatting, such as it'll also tell you if you're overusing passive voice, where there are simpler words to be used as phrases, because sometimes there's a simpler way for you to say that. And this is important because I like to highlight that unfortunately many readers do not read on a very high reading level. So you want to make sure that the reading is accessible to everyone who can read. If you're writing fiction, especially, you don't want your reading to fly over the head of anyone who's reading it. Then Hemingway will also tell you sentences that are hard to read or sentences that are very hard to read. So they break those two down. Sentences typically that I've seen, and for me, it will be run-on sentences or or sentences where I get a little bit too wordy. And they may not be a run-on sentence, but it may just be wordy. And as it's highlighting it to me, it'll actually highlight it like in color. So in the tool in Hemingway, it highlights adverbs in blue, it highlights passive voice in green, it highlights simpler alternatives for words that you can use in purple, it highlights sentences that are hard to use in yellow. And then finally, when you see that red, obviously anyone who sees red on a paper, it screams at you, but it tells you sentences that are very hard to read. Ideally, it'll also tell you a count of the total that you have throughout the selection of text that you include in the tool. And for some, you can have a few, like for instance, adverbs. It'll tell you based on the length of the passage that you are providing, how many is okay and that you can get by with. And then if you're over that number, you definitely want to consider minimizing it. For hard to read and very hard to read sentences, it doesn't necessarily give you a count because you don't necessarily want those. You don't want sentences that are hard to read and definitely don't want sentences that are hard to read. Sometimes I will reread those sentences and be like, oh no, that's exactly what I want to say. It's perfect. I'll keep it. Sometimes I'll read it back and be like, yeah, maybe I can change that a bit to make it not so difficult to read. And I'll change up either taking some words out or rearranging the structure of the sentence to make it a little bit simpler to read. So Hemingway is an amazing tool for you to use to kind of highlight what you may not catch in just reading the paragraph, or excuse me, the selection over to yourself. And it also may not be something that you catch in like a grammar editing tool. So like with Word, it may pick out, where there's commas and where sentences, where you need capital tense. I may point out a few grammatical things, but Hemingway is typically looking for things in readability for the reader and not necessarily grammatic errors. Another tool that I just started using and will be working with in this manuscript is ProWriting Aid. Was deciding between two tools, AutoCrit and ProWriting Aid, and trying to figure out which one would be best for me. One of my deciding factors was usability, because if you don't know already, I do have an IT background and user interface is huge for me. So being able to navigate easily from different tabs within a tool, how I can read the responses and feedback, etc., is very important to me. Excuse me. So ProWriting Aid won out in that case. That the user experience was much better for me personally. So I will be using it and actually use it for one of my one of my chapters, although I'm not quite there yet, to just see what type of feedback it gives back to me. And is very helpful. It's much like Hemingway, but goes maybe one level deeper, and that it also points out grammatical errors and it points out things to improve your writing. So not only just is the sentence hard, but how can you improve it? What ways can you look into? And then also gives you a number of reports that'll basically take your writing and compare it against other writers, other texts, and things like that. So ProWriting Aid will be the tool I'll use. I'll come back and make a video all on ProWriting Aid once I get deep into that level of editing. Right now, I am still at the Hemingway level where I've done the read aloud. I am now on Hemingway, so I'm going through with a pass that through Hemingway, and then hopefully my next pass will be ProWriting Aid, while I get one level deeper in my editing. I've thrown in a fourth tool, although this wasn't part of my three tools to use, and it's not actually a tool, but it is a way that you can edit your work, and that is critique partners. I will stress this because I am loving my critique group and all the feedback they are giving me, because it's not only pointing out the grammatical errors or the readability, but it's actually pointing out, like, logically, does this make sense? Does this flow with the story? Is this slowing me down? Is it taking me out of the story and making me think a little bit too hard and stopping me from reading? Because we don't ever want the readers to come out of the story. You want them to read and continue reading page after page. That's how you get your page turners. So you want your book to be reviewed by critique partners. And I can't stress this enough. This is an amazing tool that you can use while editing. Again, top three tools that you can use while editing your manuscript are Microsoft Read Aloud, Hemingway, and ProWriting Aid. And please don't forget to look at the description where I'll include a few more details on these tools and the pricing for each of them. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll respond there or in another video. I hope this has been helpful, and happy writing and editing.